record, and now I can share my screen with you again. Okay, great. So let me just check in and make sure that everybody can, where's my chat box here? I think the tricky part about sharing my screen with you is that I can't see the chat box. So if you have a question and I can't see that you're raising your hand, please feel free to just unmute yourself, and that way I'll know if there's a question. So welcome everybody this morning. This is we're talking about the Dream School Path today, how to create and express the story that will get you in. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of how this webinar is going to run. For the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to give you a lot of information about the college admissions process. And this is information that not a lot of people know. And but I've been in this industry for about 15 years, and I want to share with you some of the most important pieces of information that I've learned from all of my experience so that this process can be a lot easier for you. After that, after I give you some of this really great content, if you'd like to know more, I'm going to share with you about how you and your child can work personally with me if you'd like. And then, of course, we'll have a chance for questions at the very end. And I love that we're on Zoom together so we can actually have the conversation. So my primary goal for you is to walk away from this webinar with some really useful information that you can use right now to create a really solid and stress-free path into college and really understand what it means to create and express your story. So that's our agenda for today. Let me start by introducing myself. I'm Elizabeth Dankosky, and for the last 15 years, I've been working as a college consultant, helping students get into their dream schools. My students have been accepted into all of the top schools in the nation, so schools like Harvard. I have to move forward with my slides here for a minute. I'm going to go through this a little bit. So my students have been accepted into Harvard, MIT, Columbia, Stanford, all of the top schools. And what I love is that even though many students come to me as rising seniors, most of my students do, it turns out that 100% of my students are accepted into the top 40 schools, and 75% of my students are accepted into the top 20. So I myself graduated magna cum laude from Wellesley College, and I went on to earn my master's degree in writing from Bennington College. And I focused on creative nonfiction writing, which is basically a lot of personal essay and memoir, which is exactly what the college admissions process calls for. So currently, I'm also a blogger for the Huffington Post, where I write about how to demystify the college admissions process. So the combination of my background doing this for so many years and my own experience of my writing background has given me a lot of information about how to approach this whole industry and this whole process. But before we really dive in here, I want to ask you a question, and that is, do you know what it takes to get into the top schools? That's a big question that I think a lot of people think they know the answer to, or else they feel like they have no idea. And what I see is that most people think that it's your grades and your test scores and your high-level extracurriculars. But when we look at the acceptance rates, do you know what these acceptance rates are? Most people have been hearing about them, especially with the recent admissions results coming out just in the last week or two. Most people would just say, okay, it's 5.2% at Harvard, it's Princeton 6.5, Stanford was 4.69 this year, so very low. But I work a lot in the Chinese community, and for those students, it's not just 5.2% at Harvard or 4.69 at Stanford. It's Chinese students are working with quotas. Asian students are working with quotas. So it's literally sometimes less than 1% chance of getting into these schools. So when we think about why are so many students getting rejected? Well, partly it's the quotas for a certain population of students, but even more than that, it's because colleges are looking for something very specific, and it's something very different from what you're being told. It has very little to do, in fact, with your grades and test scores. I'm going to go a lot more into that in a minute, but everyone has been taught to think that if they just work hard enough and get high enough grades and test scores and engage in very high level activities, that's the secret to admissions. And in fact, I used to think the same thing too. But I realized that it's a lot like thinking that if you get straight A's in business school, you can automatically go out and start a multi-million-dollar business the minute you leave the campus. If you think about a new MBA grad, he's just gathered all of this great knowledge from his textbooks and he thinks, okay, this is it. I'm going to apply everything I've just learned. And he takes all of this, textbook knowledge to Starbucks and he starts planning his business. Now, do you think that he's going to be very successful if he's just relying on his textbooks to launch his business? No, it's going to be impossible for him to get his business off the ground if he tries to do it without partnering with someone who has real-world experience. Actually, there are a lot of stories of MBA students who went out and got themselves into a whole lot of debt and had to declare bankruptcy because they thought their classroom experience was enough to get them started. Because all of the theory and the classroom learning in the world will never be real-world experience. And the truth is that all of us, whether we're starting a business or we're trying to get into a top-tier school, we can't do it alone. All of us need someone much more experienced to step in and show us how we can avoid all those rookie mistakes so that we can actually be successful. And that's why I'm here, to share with you my firsthand real-world experience so you don't have to go through what so many students are dealing with right now, which is getting accepted or rather rejected from their top choice schools. And I think about those students who just, in the last week or two got all of this news. And can you imagine what it's like to be one of those students right now? You've just opened your email or you've torn open your letter, and after 4 years of getting incredible grades and scoring the very top SAT or ACT scores and volunteering hundreds of hours and devoting hundreds more hours to top extracurricular activities, you just stare at this letter saying, no, thank you, I'm sorry, it wasn't enough. And it's brutal. This happens to tens of thousands of kids every single spring. But the kids who got in, you better believe they had someone to show them the way. And that's what you need too. That's why I have such incredible success rates with my students, because I show them exactly what they need. But right now, the whole admissions process is a crazy amount of work. It doesn't seem like that. It's like you have to get these perfect grades, these straight A's, perfect grades on perfect test scores, and feels like you have to have this crazy, impressive, long resume. And all of this feels like we can't make one mistake. Like if you get a B in Spanish, it's going to be this blight on your manuscript or transcript for the rest of your life. Or if you only volunteer a couple of hours a week, it's going to look like you're not committed enough to social justice. And it just makes everyone so worried. There's so much pressure, and it's just this pressure to be perfect. And that's exactly what I want to talk with you about on this webinar, because the truth is that perfect is almost the worst enemy to getting into your dream school. I'm going to go over some facts in a minute. It can actually backfire, because when we're focused on perfection, we're not focused on our own individual strengths and interests and gifts. And the truth is that the schools admit students not for being perfect, but for what each individual student brings to the campus. In fact, they admit students based on the power of each student's unique story. So today I've got some really great insights to share with you, a few secrets about how the admissions process really works, things you probably don't know but are definitely going to have an impact on your child's college prep. So let me tell you just a little bit about how I got into this, and then I'll go into all of these facts, because this is a really important piece of what we're going to talk about today. So when I was attending Wellesley, I was one of the lead writing tutors there, and I was asked to work with an 8-year-old who was doing high school level math. His parents wanted one of the, a really top writing tutor to come in and kind of balance out his language arts skills. And we had a great time together. And then because I did such a great job with this little kid, the family's neighbors and friends started calling me and asking me to tutor their kids in the SAT and in writing. And then eventually, of course, they started asking me to do college applications with them. And so by the time I graduated from Wellesley, I had a full-time schedule of students. It was all word of mouth. Along the way, I hadn't gone into this thinking I was going to be a college consultant. So I read what I thought I needed to know for the college admissions process. And I really thought I was on the right path because so many of my students were getting into incredible schools, Harvard, MIT, Columbia, all the top schools. And it was so amazing to see that, just by doing what I was naturally gifted at with my writing, especially, and editing and coaching students, it was just, we were getting phenomenal results. But I started working with more and more students until eventually it was primarily college admissions work that I was doing. And the more closely I worked with students, the bigger my classes got, the more I began to feel pretty concerned about the process. For one thing, it started with the level of stress that I was seeing in my students. They were just working so hard to get these top grades and test scores and do all of these busy, high-level, resume-worthy extracurriculars. And even then, with all of the success that was supposed to get them into their top choice schools, even then, some of them weren't getting in. But what was happening is they weren't just getting rejected. Instead, they were getting waitlisted. And okay, so I was fairly new to this whole process. And so I couldn't figure out what was going on. I thought that these kids had everything that they needed, everything everyone said that they needed. And it was so frustrating for them and for me. Now, all of them, of course, got into incredible schools. Like, one of my students, she was really aiming for Yale a few years ago, and she ended up getting into Tufts. So, that's still a phenomenal school, but she was so disappointed by the process. And I was disappointed for her because I thought that we had everything we needed to help her stand out. So I was really determined to figure this out because I loved my students and I didn't want them to deal with this kind of frustration and disappointment. So I just read and I researched and I talked to people and I was kind of relentless. I just thought, okay, I have to figure out what's going on here. And so this is as I've had this slide up here, the first thing I realized is that our current high school system is really kind of messing things up for our kids. It's really not preparing our students for today's admissions because it's operating from an old-fashioned, outdated model. So that was the first problem. But just as important, I found out that the college admissions process really isn't set up for students to benefit. It's set up for the colleges to look good, especially to the top schools. And a lot of that comes from the rankings. So, which I discovered are really quite unreliable. So after all of my research, I finally felt like I cracked the code. I came up with this amazing solution to the college prep and admissions process, one that radically reduces the stress and significantly improves students' chances of getting into their dream school. But I realized that no one knows this code. No one is talking about it, and no one's even admitting that there is a code. Or if they do acknowledge that there's one, they tell you it's all about grades. And so that means that hardworking, great students, just like your kids, are probably getting great grades and are at risk for getting rejected, which is devastating. But so you deserve to know what's going on. I want everyone to know this because the whole process can feel so mysterious. I'm going to take the whole thing apart for you and share 3 different secrets with you today. The first one is how our high school education system makes it harder for students to get into their dream school and what you can do instead. And I'm really going to dive deep into this. And a lot of it's connected to your story that we've been talking about. Secret number 2 is how to break the rules of perfect grades and test scores and still get into the college of your dreams. Now, I'll talk about this later. I'm not saying that grades and test scores don't matter at all. Of course they do. You just need a certain level of grades and test scores. And after that, once you're at a certain level, it literally becomes 5% of your application. So we're going to talk about how you can kind of get around this perfection model and do something that will be much more powerful for the application. And then finally, secret number 3, how to do the one thing that you really need to get into the school of your dreams. This is connected to the stories we've been talking about. And this is where we really get into the nitty gritty of all this. I'm going to talk about exactly what you need to do to get into a great school, break it all down for you so that you can position yourself and help your child position himself, herself in the absolutely best way possible to get into a dream school. So my goal is that I want you to get to the end of this presentation and feel so relieved to know that the whole process is demystified and that you can get around the usual rejection letters and waitlist statuses. And I'm going to show you how to do all of this in a way that's fun and natural and empowering and, most important, actually works. So let's dive into this. Let's go and this is what I've been saying, that this new way that I've created is really, if students are coming to me and getting 75% acceptance rates at the top 20 schools as rising seniors, if we start this process earlier and you know exactly what to do earlier in high school, you can get that acceptance rate up to nearly 100%, which is pretty phenomenal. So, all right, let's dive into this. Secret number one, how our high school education system often makes it harder to get into your dream school and what you can do instead. So we have to back up a little bit and do a little bit of history here. So the important thing to know is that our current high school system originated in the mid-1800s. And it was created around the time that the Industrial Revolution was taking off. It was actually inspired by the Prussian school of model of schooling, which eventually came to be known for the way it turned out obedient soldiers and obedient factory workers, because it was focused on this very narrow standardized curriculum. But what happened was in the mid-1800s, Horace Mann was nominated the Massachusetts Secretary of Education, and it was Mann's job to figure out how to implement an effective school system. So what was happening is the Prussian model was really popular in Europe at this time. So Mann took a big trip over to Germany, and he came back a complete zealot for the system. He really admired that the teachers were trained in this standardized government-regulated curriculum, and because there was no formal schooling at that point, it just seems like that was a really good way to establish some form of education, particularly with what was going on at the time, which is that, first of all, we were entering the Industrial Revolution. We were coming out of slavery, and the massive numbers of immigrants were coming into this country. And so we needed to educate all of these kids who were coming into the country. And even more, we needed to prepare students for the current economic reality of their day, which was, of course, a lot of factories. Now, factories could employ a huge number of people, but in order to convince all these people to stand in place for 8, 10, 12 hours a day and do one thing over and over again, which was very new at the time, because, everyone would have been coming from, either farming or being artisans, certainly not just standing in these factories that weren't used to that. So they had to train people to be compliant, which is where our schooling system comes in. Those bells that ring in the high school? Most public high schools have these bells. They're actually the same exact bells that they used in the factories to indicate that the shift was over. So it's funny, but we can actually see that we're still very much influenced by this early industrial era education, just even by the bells alone. And a big part of what Mann thought contributed to an excellent education was this idea of, obeying. And he once wrote that values such as obedience to authority, promptness in attendance, and organizing time according to bell ringing help students prepare for future employment. Now, this, of course, is kind of funny and old-fashioned, because I don't think most of us would say that obedience is the number one priority we want to see in our kids, especially in this era today. I'm not saying we don't want our kids to obey at all, but I don't think that that's the number one priority in this new era we're living in. But Mann needed to figure out how to set up students for the economic reality of his day. In other words, he had to turn kids into successful adults who could go into the factories and do exactly what they were told. And the problem is that our education system hasn't evolved since that time. But of course, we're in a brand new era. And so because our system hasn't evolved, we've become hugely focused on standardized testing. In fact, by the time a student graduates today, so much testing is going on that a student today takes an average of 113 different standardized tests by the time he graduates. And what I find is that all of this testing ends up making everyone feel that there's only one way to prove intelligence and knowledge, that is through the highest test scores and the highest grades possible, as if these scores and grades automatically prove that you're educated and ready to take your knowledge out into the world. But of course, we know that these tests can't take into consideration the breadth and depth of a student's comprehension, and even more, whether a student can go out and apply what he's learned in today's world. So basically, our high schools are stuck in an old system, and our schools aren't preparing our students for college. So the big question is, okay, so what do the colleges really want to see? They're actually much more interested in looking at the whole student, at the way a student takes the information that she's been given and runs with it and uses it to make her world or the world around her a better place. Much more than straight A's and perfect test scores, colleges want to understand a student's story. Let me catch up with this. There we go. And this is the number one thing that comes down to the power of your application. 5% of your application is grades and test scores. 40% is how you actually, 40 to 45% is how you actually distinguish yourself, what story you create in high school, and 50% is your actual essay, how you actually communicate that what you've done and how you're distinguishing yourself. So this is what colleges are focusing on. And of course, we're in this new era now where technology has changed everything. The traditional way of making a living has just been turned upside down. In fact, I was just reading yesterday that the highest paid YouTube celebrity made more than $12 million last year for recording himself playing video games. Now, I'm not saying that we want our kids to go out and try to become millionaires by playing video games, but I'm saying that the traditional model of employment is changing really fast, and our education system hasn't caught up with our new innovation economy, which means that our schools aren't preparing our students for admission to college. We're telling kids to memorize all this stuff and spit it back on tests, promising that it will help them to get into their dream schools. And instead, the colleges really aren't looking that closely at the grades once you're at a certain level, because they're looking much more closely for innovation and creativity and collaboration, all qualities that our high schools are pretty much failing to teach. Failing might be a strong word, but certainly it's not a priority, right? So if our high school system is stuck in this old era of conformity and following orders instead of focus on innovation, of course, we want to know what we should do. How do we really get ready for college in a way that actually gets you into your dream school, not just, stresses the students out and lands them on the wait list? So here's the answer. You've got to catch up with this. Here we go. Create a personal story that makes the admissions officer sit up and pay attention, because the truth is that when it comes to college admissions, once a student is at a certain level of academic performance, only about 5% of that application, as I mentioned, comes from the GPA and test scores, and the rest is about your story, how you've taken your knowledge and turned it into something valuable for others. But a lot of students are following this old perfection model, and that means that they're looking like they're just churning out perfect grades and test scores. They don't look like they're preparing for today's economy. But what I've found over and over is that when a student does what he loves, and then he tells an amazing story about how passionate and lit up he is about what he's doing, the colleges absolutely love that. And students end up much more likely to get a yes at their dream school. I'll share a story with you about a student I worked with a few years ago who had done all of his applications on his own. And he submitted everything, and he got a waitlist status at Harvard. And when he came to me and he said, "Is there anything I can do to get off the waitlist?" I said, "Well, show me your essay, because if you got waitlisted, your grades and your test scores are probably fine." Let's look at the essay. So he had written an essay where it was more about his interest in business and science. And he thought that would be a sort of unique take, because he didn't think that most students would share that that common interest. And I said, well, look, yes, it's fine, but you're not really standing out among all of these other applicants. Let's write a much more personal story, something that really showcases what you individually are bringing to this campus that no one else is. So we ended up writing a new essay, and we sent it in the form of a letter. And it was a beautiful essay. It was about how he had led the senior show at his school and really created this incredible unity in his class. And he came across as so creative and such a leader. And within a few weeks, he got the news that he had been accepted off of the wait list, which is extraordinary. It's almost impossible to get off of Harvard's wait list. So I tell that as an example. It's one of many I could tell you of how critical this telling the right story is. So in a minute, I'll share with you exactly how students can start to build the story much earlier than just, when you're a rising senior, and how students can really set themselves apart as innovative and creative and passionate, and as a result get into their dream school. But before I do that, I just want to talk about the game that colleges are playing and how breaking the rules is really the key to getting into your dream school. And that brings us, I'm a little behind in my slides here, but that brings us to the next secret: how to break the rules of perfect grades and test scores and still get into the college of your dreams. Now, the deal is that most people play by the rules because they think that's their only choice, and it's not hard to figure out why people think this way. Most people are following the rankings, and it turns out that the rankings are actually quite misleading. In fact, largely because of these rankings, a lot of people are focused on getting into the elite schools, but they're not necessarily focused on getting into the right schools for them, right? So many kids are playing by these rules, and they're all overworked and overstressed and on the wait list, or worse, not on the list at all. So the question is, what can we do? Well, first of all, we have to recognize that the rankings really aren't all that they're made out to be. U.S. News and World Report actually started these rankings as a moneymaker for their magazine, but it very quickly became the definitive judge of how good a school is. And the truth is that the rankings are based primarily on how much money a school has and how many students it can turn away. There's actually nothing in this formula for the rankings that actually comments on the quality of the education at these schools. So back when U.S. News started these rankings, the schools saw very quickly that they could improve their rankings if they had lower acceptance rates. So they started marketing their schools like crazy so that they could get more kids to apply and therefore say no to more students. And in fact, Princeton, this is just one example, but Princeton reported an almost 95% increase in the number of applications that they've received in the last 10 years. 95. So we ended up with numbers that are shrinking every year. For example, Harvard, had 5.2 this year. Stanford's was only 4.69. And behind all of these shrinking acceptance rates is a very big marketing budget. But most people don't know that. They just look at that and they think, oh my God, this is impossible. How can I ever get it? It's not even worth trying anymore. Now, a lot of this comes down, to money, of course. Colleges need money to function. We get that. But we just need to recognize that we should look past all of these outer trappings to find out what colleges really do want. And this is, the question, of course, is sorry, I'm a little bit behind here, of course. This is a piece I didn't touch on really. A rise in the number of applications does not equal a rise in the number of qualified applicants. If you think about all the marketing that they're doing right now, a lot of parents will call me and say, oh, I just got, someone just told me last week, I just got 37, invitations from colleges to apply in the mail, and they were kind of proud about that. But I said, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but it's just marketing. You can just throw it in the recycling bin. So because if they're doing this mass marketing and they're even doing things like we'll waive your application fee, then kids who really don't have the qualifications to be applying to these top schools. They don't know that. They're just thinking, oh, Harvard's inviting me to apply, or this, top school's inviting me to apply. They must know something about me. That means I can actually get in. And it's quite unfair to our students, because it's really just about marketing. So really the question that we want to come to is, what are the colleges really looking for? Because if we think about who's doing the rankings, it's the administrators. It's not the actual admissions officers. They're two very different parts of the colleges. So when we say what are the colleges looking for, we're talking about what are the admissions officers looking for. And for me, it always comes down from all the years that I've been doing this, it always comes down to breaking the rules. And they're looking for engaged, inspired students, not someone who just churns out grades and test scores, but someone who's creating and contributing, things that our high schools really aren't teaching for the most part. So let's go to the talked about breaking the rules. Let's go to our third secret, how to do the one thing that you really need to get into the school of your dreams. So here it is. What every student needs to create is a project that showcases their unique interests and serves others in a remarkable way. A project like this, one that really makes a difference, is the perfect way to show the admissions process officers who you are, what your story is. Because that's what colleges care about, your story. They want to know who you are beyond your grades and test scores, and it's our job to show them that each student who's applying is far more than a bunch of numbers, and we can show them how, when they build a project like this, you can really show your creativity and innovation and passion, because grades are always secondary in light of this kind of lit up, passionate contribution. So all of this is, I could tell you so many stories about how I've done this. I've seen this with my students, but the idea is that a lot of people think that when they come, that it's just about telling the right stories when you're, a rising senior. Or in your senior year when you're submitting your applications. And what I say is that's way too late. You've got to start creating your story much earlier, ideally at the end of middle school, definitely at the beginning of middle school. And you create your story by creating a project. So let's talk a little bit about this project. Basically, a project that really sets a student apart is something that combines the student's unique interests and talents to make an impact on the larger community. And there's so many examples I could give you, but let me just tell you a little bit about Rebecca. So she decided that she would apply to start a Best Buddies chapter at her school, because she was really passionate about working with kids with special needs. She had worked a lot in camps over the summers, and her heart just went out to this population, but she discovered that she had to get the school administrators on board in order to get this Best Buddies chapter going. And for those of you who don't know, Best Buddies is an organization that pairs high school students with special needs kids and really brings those special needs kids into the community and makes them feel really valued. And so it was going to take a fair amount to get the school administrators on board, and she had to do quite a large campaign in her school to get kids interested and excited about this new undertaking. But she just decided to set aside a few hours a week, and she really threw her heart into this. And by the end of the year, she'd got about 50 kids involved, and the response from the students and the teachers was incredible. She was thrilled, and she ended up when she worked on her college applications, of course, she wrote about this and had a beautiful essay about her experience of creating this and what it did for her community and for these kids that she loves so much. And her father actually loved the essay so much that he told me he literally cried when he read it, because it captured the essence of who she was so beautifully. And that's what, so it's the combination of she created a beautiful story before she even went to write it. And then we were able to write it in a way that really captured the heart of her experience in the process of building this project. And when the results came out that spring after her applications, she found out that she'd been accepted early decision to MIT, which of course was her top choice school. And of course we were thrilled, but when I looked at my class of who was getting in and who was getting waitlisted, the kids who were getting in, like Rebecca, all had something that was really distinguishing them from everyone else. In other words, they weren't just plugging into clubs and extracurriculars that were available through school, or not just doing music or whatever. They had really taken what they were interested to create something that was unique to their interests. And of course, I can tell you so many stories more stories about this, and I will if you want to hear more later. But I think that what I'd like to pause here is, first of all, just ask you whether you have any questions at this point. I'm going to just I think maybe you could just unmute yourself if you want, if you have any specific questions, so that I can keep the slides up. So feel free to jump in if you have any questions. But right now might be a really good time for me to tell you about the ways that I have created to work with students and really support them in creating and building and writing their stories. So I'll just jump into that. Unless anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in if you want to know anything first. So the first is my Dream School Path, and this is a 12-month mentoring program for highly committed students. A lot of the students that I work with are aiming for the top tier schools, but that's not the only type of student that I work with. I basically am just looking for students who want to make a difference and who really want the best choice of getting into whatever their top choice school is. So this is a year-long mentoring program. And I'll tell you a little bit about this. The first 6 weeks, we do a foundation curriculum. This is based on the program that I created last year and ran as my beta test. And it was an incredible experience. I'll tell you about what one student did after she went through that in a second. But the first 6 weeks is sort of the foundation curriculum. And so it's a lot of sort of intensive teaching and work ahead of time, so that then we can go and implement for the rest of the year. So the first week we talk about who are you? What is your unique personality? What is your what are your greatest strengths? So we can really figure out how we play to those. And I'll be bringing in my colleague who's an expert in this area, and we'll be teaching students about this component. So we start from that place of, we know exactly where your strengths are. Week 2 is about how do you want to stand out? What do you want to be known for? How do you want to take those strengths and how do you perceive yourself? How do you think others perceive you? Is there anything you'd like to change about that? So these first 2 weeks are really getting a foundation in who are you and how do you want to stand out, and how do you want to show up in the world? And these are questions that kids just don't get asked at school. The teachers don't have time. They're busy teaching to the test. Then in week 3, this is all about the project. Do something cool. In other words, figure out what your project's going to look like for the rest of the year. Week 4 is called Partner Up. This is where we talk about if you need a specific kind of mentor to support you in whatever your project is. So someone, say, wants to be a research scientist may want to do some particular kind of research, and obviously will need a mentor to get into a lab or to start the research or get some kind of support. So we talk about how do you actually find a mentor, how do you get someone to agree to work with you, because you can't just show up on someone's lab doorstep and say, hey, can you mentor me? So it's really about building a relationship, and I teach students how to do that. Then we talk about week 5 is kind of charting your path. So really getting really clear about how you're going to build this project to the highest level possible, and what else you need to do to kind of increase your chances of getting into your top choice school. And then finally, of course, we talk about the scheduling, like how you're actually going to make time for this. Many students are overscheduled and would feel like, oh, I have no time to do an additional project. And the problem is that they're probably doing activities that aren't necessarily helping them in their strategy to get into their top choice school. So we're going to talk about how do you decide what courses to enroll in, how do you decide what extracurriculars to choose, how do you make time and actually schedule time in for your project so that you can have something substantial to show for this by the end of the year. And then, so the first 6 weeks are hour-and-a-half classes. We meet every Monday evening. This starts the first week in May. And then the remainder of the year, after we have those first really core 6 weeks, we have weekly 1 to 1.5 hour meetings every week to implement. And this is where we have weekly accountability check-ins. We have continued support for project building. We have connection with specialized mentors, tutors, other resources. So I will help students. I have a lot of great connections with people who are interested in mentoring in specific areas. So I will do my best to help the students find a specific mentor if they're not sure how to do that. Help them figure out if they need tutors, if they're struggling in a certain academic area, and any other resources that they need to do with high school and to do with preparation for college eventually. So for example, we'll work on selecting the courses and that you're going to take next year. How do you plan for the summer? When do you start, studying for the SAT or the ACT? Just basically kind of a holistic support for whatever the students need to move forward and feel that they're making progress. But it's also a holistic resource for the parents too. So every once in a while, once a month or so, we'll have someone to come in and talk about setting up the financial component of preparing for college, because obviously that's a huge piece of college admissions. Or just what questions do you have? Let's have an open forum and talk to me about what are your concerns, or maybe we need to talk about how to think about the ACT versus the SAT, kind of really being a resource for students and parents all the way through for an entire year. So the Dream School Path is normally $4,000 for the full year of mentoring. But I'm so excited about this program, and especially as a thank you for those of you who are here on the webinar today. I have a special pricing available for those who take action quickly, and that's for the next 5 days. This is the special pricing goes until 4/20, Wednesday 4/20, and it's either a $3,500 one-time payment or $1,500 followed by 5 payments of $500. And the program, as I mentioned, begins Monday, May 2nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. In a minute, I'm going to give you a link to an application form for those of you who are interested. And I'll also send you the link for my website as well. Now, I wanted to also, there are going to be parents of juniors here, right? So they're going to think, well, project, this is too late. I just need to help my student write the application essays. So this is always the tricky thing about, serving in this market is I have to address the needs of multiple students. So I really thought a lot about how I can support my juniors. The way that I've set this up, I did this last year. I did a 6-week program last year where we did the top 5 essays for the students' applications. And it worked really well. I had one student accepted to Dartmouth, another to UPenn, and there was UC Berkeley, and I'm forgetting all the others, but we got some really great results from this mastermind. So what I thought is that this year, my only hesitation was that we didn't get to fully complete the applications for all of the essays. We did the top 5 essays, but we didn't get to complete 3 top applications, for example. So that's what I decided to do for this one, is that where we would craft the 650-word personal essay, and then we complete all of the supplements for the top 3 schools. Because once you've gotten the essays written for the top 3 schools, you can go and reuse or recraft those essays for your target and mid-tier schools, because most students I work with are applying to about 8 to 10 schools. So the top third is going to be your reach schools. And of course, you want your best essays to be sent to them, and then you can just rework them for the target and safety schools. So that's going to start the first week. Okay, yeah. Here's my special pricing for you until 4/20. It will start July 4th. This is either a $4,500 one-time payment or $2,500 followed by 4 payments of $625. And what I would say is I created this because to work with me one-on-one to do your top 3 schools is a minimum of $7,500 just to do the top 3, and that doesn't even include all of the filling out the application and all of that we're going to do through the mastermind. So I wanted to make this really a much more manageable option for more students. And this is common. This will be for a small group of 5 students, no more than 5. And it's set up so that each student can get half an hour of one-on-one time with me each week, plus editing on their essays, and then also learning together from each other as well. So let me just ask if you have questions. I'm going to show you that you can fill out an application here for either of the programs, bit.ly.com, dreamschool app. And let me just, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and turn on my video and just ask if anyone has questions. What are you wondering about in terms of the application process, in terms of the admissions process, in terms of the programs themselves that I've created? You can either put something in the chat or you can feel free to unmute yourself, whatever is most useful to you. So, no questions? Okay. So, would it be helpful, would you like to hear more stories about students that I've worked with and their different projects that they've created? There was a student I worked with who went through my 6-week program last year, when I didn't know this when she came into the program, but she had a 50% chance of graduating from high school. And she after she went through the program, she created there's a question from someone here. Okay, I'll get to that in 1 second. I'll just tell this story about Bain and then I'll answer your question about when it starts. So this student, she had a 50% chance of graduating from high school. And by the time she got through the program, she just sailed through it so much that her father said he was at peace about his daughter's future, which was just incredible. But what she did was she had gotten involved in a legal program in her in her school, and it just really lit her up. She loved doing it. She decided she wanted to become a defense attorney. And when she when a lot of kids in her school weren't able to afford the cost of the program because she was down in West Palm Beach. So there were a lot of kids from Guatemala and other developing countries who couldn't afford the $200 to get into the program. So she decided that she was going to do a fundraiser to raise money for them. And then she decided she was going to create a nonprofit for them. And she petitioned her school to do an independent study so she could get credit for working on this. And then by the time that she was kind of going through this, she had set up an appointment. She has an appointment this summer to meet with Sandra Day O'Connor to get support for bringing this to a national level. So she just had an extraordinary experience from just 6 weeks in the program. But part of the reason that she was so successful is that she had a great relationship with her parents, and they were really able to help support her. They weren't doing the project for her, but they were just really supporting her. And I thought, not every teenager has that kind of ability to work with his or her parents like that. And so we really, I don't want to just plant seeds. I want to actually help students build this, because this project is so critical to helping them stand out and creating that kind of story. So I see that there are some questions coming up. Let me just see what this is. Okay, so So yes, when someone was asking, so July 4th will start for juniors, the week of July 4th. Yes, the juniors will start then. Since it's a small group of 5 students, it will kind of be able to talk with each other and figure out what's the best schedule for everyone, since it's just a small group. And then someone else is asking how many students can be enrolled in the Dream School Path. So I'm limiting it to 20 right now, and I have a few more slots available to enroll students. But I only want it to be 20 at this point because more than that, students aren't going to get the one-on-one help that they need. If I get more students who want to join than that, I will bring in another mentor. I have someone I'm working with who's excellent who will co-teach with me and will make sure that everyone gets enough one-on-one support. And then, okay, someone else is asking for the 1-year program, when will it start and what grade students? Okay, so the 1-year program starts the first week in May. And this is ideally for 8th through 10th grade because now we're at the end of the year, right? So the 8th graders, we're at the end of their year. So this will be a beautiful transition into freshman year so that they really set up this really strong and powerful path. Now, a lot of people say, there's some objections that people have, which is, I'll just wait until junior year. That's all. I only really need to tell a story in junior year. I can wait until then. And what I say is no, absolutely not. I mean, yes, it's true that 75% of my students who are rising seniors get into one of the top 20 schools or their top choice schools. But if we start this earlier, and everyone builds this story from an early time on to the highest level possible, then we've got this incredible way of being able to help students create and build their story and their project so that by the time they go to write about this on their applications, it's so easy for them to talk about what they've done. Some people are worried about not having enough time, like their students are too busy, they're not going to have time to do this. And what I say is most students are probably overscheduled, but not necessarily in a way that's supporting them in their strategy. So, okay, a question's coming in. Do you meet with a student one-on-one in person or via Skype for the Dream School Path? So this is a group mentoring program for up to 20 students. We meet on Skype or Zoom, like we're meeting here. And the first 6 weeks are a really dedicated curriculum where I'm doing a lot of teaching, and then there's opportunity for questions afterwards. But the rest of the year, after that first 6 weeks, is much more about, okay, what are the 3 things that you committed to last week? Did you get them done? If you didn't, what do you need to move forward? What resources can we help you get? Whether that's partnering with a mentor, whether that's talking to a teacher, whether that's just a little bit of setting up the schedule, your schedule differently or whatever. Really focusing on becoming resourceful. And okay, so this is a question from Victoria. What should middle schoolers do to create their stories? So this is great. Middle schoolers, so the younger middle schoolers, I say, the important thing for them is to be really creative and to try whatever is interesting to them. A lot of kids, it's too strong to say to middle schoolers or even high schoolers, what are you passionate about? Most kids don't know. And so I always say, well, what is interesting to you? What are you curious about? If you look around you, what kind of problems do you want to solve? What kinds of issues in the world do you think that you could take what you're interested in and address? And that's, even for middle school students, they still notice things that are going on around them that they want to fix or they want to address. And so what I say to them is start to really think about what you're interested in, what you're curious about, and what you can do to bring that interest to your community in some way. It could be, for example, I had a student in my program last year who was an artist and loved animals. So she was volunteering at an animal shelter and then using her art to create fundraisers to raise money for the animal shelter or for other organizations connected to animals that she was really passionate about. And in other words, the project doesn't have to be something super like it's not about creating a nonprofit like the way that my one student I was telling you about did last spring. It's more about, are you lit up? Are you invested? Do you care about this? Are you excited about this? Okay, so juniors, and next question is juniors in July. They are grade 10 or grade 11 for the time. Okay, so juniors in July are rising seniors because they have to work on their applications. Anyone who's grade 10 who's going to become a junior, in September, they can still join the mentoring program and really create a powerful year-long plan for how they're going to really stand out when they go to write their applications next summer. Does that make sense? Great. What other questions do you have? This is something that I'm really excited about, this mentoring program, because it's not just about getting kids into college. It's about helping kids thrive in college and beyond. And because imagine if you're going into college with this sense of what you're contributing and what you've created, you're going to have very different relationships with your professors. You're going to have very different relationships with your peers. You're going to have a lot more sense of purpose and clarity going through the college experience. And that's really what I'm invested in, is how can we, there are a lot of people who say, yes, I can get you into your top choice schools, but it's not enough to just get you in. I need to make sure that our students are really thriving there. Okay, so a couple more questions. How do juniors create that powerful story in the summer since the time is very short? Well, for juniors, there's a couple of different ways to do this. At this point, primarily it's about how do you tell incredible stories on your college applications, and that's what I help students do. That's just my zone of genius. But in terms of thinking about a longer term strategy for juniors, one of the things that I'm having them, my juniors I'm working with right now, is come up with a strategy that they implement between now and the end of next year so that they can assume that they will get a deferred status for their early decision or early action applications, or a waitlist status for when the results come out next spring. Assume that you will, so that you're building something all the way through. Now, I'll give you a couple of examples. I met with a student who was the parents of a junior who said, there's no way I can possibly implement another project on top of everything my child is already doing. So I took a look at everything she was doing. She had this huge roster of extracurricular activities. And I said, no, we cannot add anything to do that. But she was going to be the captain of her ultimate Frisbee team and of her math team. And I said, why don't we just have her focus on bringing the highest level of creativity to her applications, or to her role as captain, and then she can write about that. And that's just as powerful as having more time when you're younger to build the program, build the project. Another student that I'm working with right now, he's a mathematician and a novelist, and he's very interested in the philosophy of math, and he wants to become captain of his team next year. So I said, go talk to the kids in your math team and find out who's not feeling included, because there's sort of three different tiers. It's the kids who are really good and they always compete. There are kids who are kind of in the middle and sometimes compete, and there are kids who just show up once a week for an hour and they don't feel that invested in that. I said, so go talk to the kids who aren't feeling that invested, find out what they need to start really feeling a part of this and feeling like they're contributing. He loved that idea. So he's creating sort of a lecture series to really teach kids what they need to know and teach kids how they can, improve and also feel more, he's focusing a lot on team unity as well. And then of course he's going to write about that. There's a bunch of other things he's doing as well, but the idea is you want to bring that level of creativity. That's how you create that project. It's all about how can you be as creative as you can if you're a junior at this point, with what you're already doing. Okay, so let's see some questions here. So juniors, can we have a detailed schedule and content for the mentoring program? Yes, I have that available through the website, and I also have a PDF, and I'll send that out to you as an email this afternoon. And then from Mindy, you're saying, how much time do you spend with parents for the student who is in the Dream School Path program? Well, that's like a once a month kind of thing. Just I send weekly update or regular, not necessarily weekly. We don't always have something we need to say every week, but regular updates to the parents saying this is what we're working on, this is how it's going. I'm really invested in my kids' success. So this is a group program, and I won't have time to work with everyone one-on-one. But I'm also very invested in this working. And so if you have questions, you're welcome to email me, and we can, figure out whether we need to get on the phone or whether it's a quick question. I can answer it through email. Okay, great. So any other questions? So let me just put in here the application form, bit.ly /Dream School app. I'll send it out in the email too this afternoon. But so glad all of you are here. Thank you so much for your questions. Feel free to reach out to me through email if you have any specific questions. I'm happy to get on the phone with you. And I am really looking forward to seeing some of you in this program, or these two different programs. So thanks again. Have a wonderful Saturday, and we'll connect soon.